Good evening, everyone. This evening we'll be telling some stories about the life of Durga Mata. She was one of Yogananda's closest disciples, and she had a very interesting life. And so tonight we'll be going a little bit into the early years of her life and in meeting Master. So let's begin with a prayer. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, and our beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, saints and sages of all religions, we humbly invoke thy presence. Blessed Master, be with us tonight. Open our hearts and our minds, that we might feel thy deepest inspiration through this divine soul, your Durga Mata, your Duj. Help us to feel the joy and the inspiration behind your relationship with each other, soul to soul. Om, peace. Amen. And so we'll begin now with a chant. Brahmanandam Paramasugaram Kevalam Jnanamuti Dandvatitam Trigunarahitam Satguru Namami Ekyam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvade Sakshi Bhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Satguru Namami. Full of bliss, giving joy transcendent, of higher knowledge, the abode, do all no more, clear as the heavens, known to all as thou art that. He is pure, permanent, unmoving, the everlasting seer of all, far, far beyond qualities and thought. Guru, Lord, I bow to thee. Guru, Lord, I bow to thee. Oh, it's a little low. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. I will never forget thee, I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee, I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. I will never forget thee, I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee, I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. I will never forget thee, I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee, I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. I will never forget thee, I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee, I will never forsake thee. I will never forget thee, I will never forsake thee. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. So Durga's mother was Elizabeth Nault, and she was born in Canada, Saint Pierre, Canada. She lived from 1874 to 1828. She died when she was 54 years old. In 1886, she moved to the United States, and she lived in New York State. And her father was Adolphe Dufour, and he was born 1864. He died in 1957, and he was 93 years old. He also was born in Canada, in St. Paul Bay, Canada. And at 1864, he came to the United States. He was 19 years old. They both remained in the United States for the remainder of their lives, both of French-Canadian descent. And Durga was the youngest in their family. They had 10 children, 5 girls, 5 boys. Durga received a lot of the hand-me-downs, as you can imagine. And she said she remembered little of her childhood. She was born in 1903, and she was born in Michigan, in Iron Mountain, Michigan. And she was born Florina Alberta. That was her name. They eventually, her family moved to Michigan into a community there, and it was a French community. It was populated strictly by French, and because her mother did not speak any English, and her father spoke very little English, so it was actually more convenient for them to live amongst people that they had their heritage was from. When Durga was a little child, she was rather sickly. As I said, she remembered very little of her early childhood. But she was told, I guess she was a rather, I guess you could say, disruptive child. And apparently, when she was so sick, her mother would put these wool socks on her. And she would kick them off as a baby or as a little child because she was so sensitive. And she would kick her socks off, and they'd put a brick by her feet so that she'd stay warm, and she'd push the brick aside. And I guess that in and of itself constituted her being kind of a difficult child. And the doctor used to tease, apparently, with her mother and say, well, why don't you just give her a piece of burnt toast and let her die? So she obviously had a little bit of a reputation, and her aunt, her aunt would actually kid her as well, and she'd say, when I was carrying you to church to be baptized, I was feeling sorry for your poor mother, And I told your grandfather, if only I could accidentally slip on the ice and put this one out, it would be that much less trouble for my sister. She said, but now I'm glad that I didn't slip, because I know that your mother, I don't know what she would do without you. Durga had a very deep attachment to her mother. As a matter of fact, when she would go to sleep at night, if she would wake up, she would go in to check to make sure her mother was still breathing. She was so attached to her. She would take holy water and she would sprinkle it over her mother's bed before her mother would come into sleep. And she would pray as a child for many years. She would pray very faithfully to God, asking him to take care of her, to watch over her at night. She was under the misguided impression that if God took care of her at night, then she could take care of her mother during the day. And she didn't realize, of course, that God took care of us all the time. And Durga would pray to him and ask him to take her mother, or to take her first, should her mother pass. She wanted to die first, Durga did. And she realized at that time that if she did that, then her sisters wouldn't be around because they were all married, so her mother would be left alone. And Durga realized that she needed to stay around. So then her prayer became, take me right after my mother. And she actually asked Master later on, because Durga became very ill after her mother passed. And she asked Master if that was as a result of the prayer, and he said, yes, it was. But she also said that Master interceded for her, that she had become very ill, and that she survived because of Master. And I think it's interesting, because when you listen to Durga, when you hear the stories about Durga, there were a few times that she mentioned that Master had interceded before she had even met him. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I think for all of us, it's interesting to take a few moments and just think back on your life and ask yourself, when you may have survived something that you never would have thought you would have survived. If you're now a disciple of Yogananda's, just ask yourself if Master hadn't intervened for you in some way. I know in my life he certainly has. And it's quite remarkable when you start reflecting on that. Durga had many talents. She graduated, however, or she actually left school when she was 15, and at that age she could. And so she left school, at that time she could leave at 15. But she became extremely proficient in creative endeavors. Number one, as an artist, she practiced watercolor, she practiced oil, she became master painter, actually. She practiced acrylics. The most enjoyable for her was acrylics. She also became a sculptor. She sculpted busts and statues of Master, Rajarsi, and Anandamoyi Ma. And the other thing that she was very proficient in was that she became a master seamstress and tailor. Durga had always thought that sewing was something that was tedious and time-consuming. She never had much interest in it, but she taught herself how to do these things. And she was also known as a very good cook. And you have to ask yourself now, it seems like whenever we talk about the saints, we hear often about these amazing feats that they accomplish. And what I take away from that personally is just how much they focus and concentrate, and how focused one has to be to find God. There's stories of Sister Gyanamata, and they always said that when you were in Sister's presence, She was always focused. And that comes from a lot of discipline, a lot of training. I want to read something that Master wrote to Durga. Dear Durga, this was on June 24th in 1936. I know not when I have been pleased with anyone next to Saint Lin. Among my men disciples, Mr. Lin has the first seat in heaven, and in my heart and among my lady disciples, you will have the first seat with Sister in heaven and in my consciousness. Your behavior and work has pleased me most, and how could an uneducated one like you become so educated in everything? I have been the same way in life, read very little, but written much. And are you flattered? No. But all this I say, what comes from within, for the most wonderful cooperation that you have given. Meditate and dedicate yourself to God, and behave best before yourself within and before all. Durga had like I mentioned, a very close relationship with her mother, and she also had a close relationship with her brother, who was just 2 years older than her, and that was Ernest. And as a child, they skated together. She played hockey, ice hockey with him. So obviously she was quite physical. And when, after she left school, at, like I said, the age of 15, her mother began to take in boarders. And she was taking in boarders from one of her brother's friends. And mother would do all of the cooking, and then Durga handled all of the housework and all of the laundry. And she always worked loving to please her mother. She would do anything to get a smile from her mother. And when she was actually a little girl, one of the neighbors said to her, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" And it rolled off her tongue. She just said, "I'm going to be a sister." When she was 16, she was engaged to a Frenchman. And her mother, actually, as Durga says, in all of her wisdom, discouraged the marriage. And she would point out some of the gentleman's flaws. And she would remind Durga of times when she dated people like that and how it never worked out. And so Durga broke off that engagement. And then 3 years later, she met a man named Orta L. Darling. And Mr. Darling proved himself to be a very kind and a very generous person. She married him on her 19th birthday. He converted to Catholic. Durga was raised Catholic, and she would actually, as I talked about the attachment she had to her mother, she would go with her mother. Her mother was a devout Catholic, and her mother would go every single morning to Mass, but she would go in the dark, and Durga would accompany her during the winter. And actually, Mr. Darling converted to Catholicism in hopes to please Durga and obviously her mother. And he was told by the priest that Durga had to have as many children as nature would allow. And Mr. Darling apparently wasn't terribly keen on that idea, and his response to the priest was, "If I have to make my wife suffer having children to be Catholic, then I won't be one." And he walked out, and that was that. And Durga said that was the beginning, or one of the ways in which he just demonstrated his selflessness. After marriage, Durga and 2 of her brothers moved in back in with the family, with her mother and father. And Master actually later told Durga that she only married because of environment. And had she met him earlier or met him first, she would not have gotten married. So we'll have a chant and a little meditation before we continue. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in free. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing to fear anymore. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Nothing on earth can hold me. Rise, oh my soul, in freedom. Meditate for a few moments, for about 10 or 15 minutes. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you, all things will pass. God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone is all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone is all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you, all things will pass. God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone is all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone is all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you, all things will pass. God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone is all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone is all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you, all things will pass. God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone, God alone, God alone is all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone is all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone is all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone is all we ever need. So in 1927, Ernest was married to Florence, and as I mentioned, Ernest was the son that was, or the brother that was 2 years older than her. Ernest's son developed a very serious case of eczema, broke out into a terrible rash. And Florence had read somewhere about orange juice, fasting on orange juice and how it might help. So that's what they did. They put the little guy on some orange juice, just an orange juice fast. And Durga and Mr. Darling and Ernest and his wife were just amazed at how quickly the little boy healed. It's just amazing, it's just amazing results within a very short amount of time. So they thought, well, if that can do that for him, then let's start moving in that direction. And this became kind of a turning point for her, in the sense that they all four of them, completely changed their diet. They that night, as a matter of fact, they dropped everything for the next meal, which was caffeine of any kind, tea or coffee, any sweets, meat. They dropped it all from their diets. And of course, they got a little spacey, and she talked about this, and she said, they were all kind of walking around a little spacey. And if any of you who have done any dramatic shifts in your diet know exactly what she's talking about. But in those days, they didn't really understand it like we've kind of learned to understand it today. And so they didn't know much about protein. They didn't know much about adding maybe avocados or nuts to their diet, or even eggs or some source of dairy to give them protein. So they kind of suffered through that initially, and eventually they took some vegetarian cooking courses, and they learned a little bit more about mixing certain foods and so forth. But she said that it purified their minds, and it made them more idealistic. And after Durga got married, I don't think I mentioned this before, she and her husband and two of her brothers moved in with their parents. And later on, you'll see that they actually moved from her father's house. But Durga at one point got quite ill from doing she would fast. She actually became quite fanatic when she fasted. And she would do 3 days. Sometimes she would do as many as 21 days. And she actually became quite ill. And she said that was the second time that Master came into her life and healed her. And in 1929, actually, when she moved to Mount Washington, Master would try to fatten her up. And he'd give her lots of curries and rice. And then she would, as soon as he would leave, she would go back into fasting. And Master would come back and he said, what's going on? He said, I fatten you up, and then I leave and you get thin again. And he actually was pretty stern with her, and he said, fasting is not good for your health. Your body will be better with a little flesh. And so she stopped. Well, in 1927, Ernest knew a man at work. Ernest was a draftsman, and he worked with a man who was also a draftsman. And they had heard about a teacher that had come to Detroit. I'm just going to say a little aside here for those of you who don't know. I think Nayaswami Devi is from Detroit, Michigan. But anyway, that's just a little aside. Ernest, his friend's name was Mr. Bone. And Ernest would come home from work, and he'd tell stories that Mr. Bone had told about this long-haired Hindu man. And Ma was obviously thrilled and very fascinated to hear these stories. And then Master, they missed the first visit of Master. And he came and he found out that Master would be coming back. Ernest did. So he went and he told his wife and Mr. Darling and Durga. And so they all decided they would go and hear him. And Durga said they were all spellbound watching this beautiful man that was talking. And he played Oh God Beautiful. And in 1932, Master gave her that very harmonium that he played on. Durga said she had never heard of God mentioned in the light that Master talked about him. She'd only heard of Jesus, and she never felt that she had any hope of reaching his stature or reaching him. And Master obviously gave a very different perspective on that. Master said he takes a cabbage and he goes right to the heart of it and he pulls the heart out. That night, Master left, and he didn't shake hands that evening. It's kind of significant because the next time that she heard him, he did come out and shake hands with everyone, and which seemed to be a little bit more of an omen for her. But she went to a bazaar that was given by the church, the SRF church, and the Brahmacharya Nirod was actually in charge of the church. And from him, or the night at that bazaar, she bought her first picture of Master. And she took it into her living room and she hung it up there. And unfortunately, one of her sister-in-laws mocked it. And her mother was actually extremely hurt by that. And so her mother asked Durga to take it down. And she said, he's just much too nice a man to be mocked and laughed at. So Ma then took it down. Durga's mother had a stroke. And by the time she did have her stroke, Durga had been able to give her some of the teachings. Her mother was very supportive of her. She didn't ever try to discourage her from following Yogananda or for going for the lessons. And Ma would come in and she would see her mother as she would be standing by the door and she'd be leaning on a table. And she asked her what she was doing. And she said she saw a blue light, and within that light was a brilliant, there was or not a blue light, she said she saw a blue sky. And in the middle of that was the blue light. No, I'm sorry, was a brilliant light, along with some other colors. And she also would speak of a man with long hair and long dark hair who was also in the light. And Ma said she knew that her mother was talking about Master. After her mother's death, Durga was burning some incense. Well, actually, let me back up a minute. Let me read to you a little bit of the healings that Durga talked about that Master gave to her. The one time when her mother passed, and then this time when she was fasting. And this is my first healing from Master before he knew me. Shortly after moving, I became very ill, as previously mentioned. At the climax of this illness, all thought I was going to my Maker. That night I dreamt what is termed a real dream. It was more of a vision than a dream. I saw a woman, for the person had long dark black hair and a robe on, and later I knew that it was Master who had come to heal me. He sat on the chair next to my bed, and he lifted me sideways in his arms so that my heart was even with his. And as he did so, I felt a wave of electricity coming from his heart into mine, and it passed through my whole body and out of my toes. Slowly he laid me back onto the bed, and I asked him, "I'm dead?" He answered, "No, you're not dead. The previous day I was so weak that I couldn't even walk from the bathroom to the bathroom alone. But this morning I got up by myself and I walked." And I was on my way when Mr. Darling said, "You are walking by yourself?" And I answered, "Well, this is not me. I'm in that box." And she pointed to the bed I had just risen from. I had awakened that morning with the consciousness that I was in a funeral rough box, and I was still conscious of it when I got up. And from then on, I continued to gain strength every day. All of us would meditate together, exercise, and she's talking about the four of them, which is Ernest and his wife and Mr. Darling, would talk about the lessons constantly and continued to go to the center. And in May of 1928, Brahmachari Narode was called to Los Angeles to be the resident teacher at Mount Washington. And because the leader, Swami Dhirananda, had left the fold of his guru, Master continued his campaigns. And before leaving, Narode made me the treasurer of the Yagoda Center and in charge of holding meditation. I became too ill to continue, and it was dissolved. And so this is a second healing that she had from Master before he knew her. In the summer of 1929, we had to move to a less expensive house. And after we were settled, I had another semi-superconscious dream of Master. The doctor had thought that probably my lungs were infected, but in this dream, Master, instead of healing my chest, said, "There's nothing wrong with your lungs. It's your nerve center where the trouble is." And saying this, he cupped his fingers and he placed the tip of his fingers over my navel, saying, "I will heal you where the trouble is." And as he did so, I again felt that electric wave going through my whole body. Master looked at me and said, "What is the matter with your eyes?" And at that same time, he poked his first two fingers right into my eyes, that same electric wave going through them also. I did not know I had any physical trouble with my eyes. It served two purposes, for to this day I do not wear glasses, and it awakened my spiritual eye. I began to feel that I was living in a strange house. I was walking as if in a dream, living in an atmosphere in which I did not belong. My health began to fail again, but the doctor could not find anything wrong with me. We asked him if I went to a warmer climate, if it would help me, and he said, yes, I think it would. We knew some friends who were shortly driving to Florida. It was a good opportunity for me to go with them to a warmer climate. I looked in the East-West magazine to see if they had Yagoda centers in Florida, but they did not have at that time. I wanted to be where I could attend meetings, and that is why I decided to come to Los Angeles instead. And after that, everything moved fast. In October of 1929, Master came to Detroit. He gave a lecture in the auditorium. He was trying to gather enough of a group to go to India with him, and after the lecture, he shook hands with the audience. And when I shook hands with him, I told him that I was going to Los Angeles soon, and he said, "When you go, you must come up to Mount Washington to see us." I was so happy that he invited me. I did not know at that time that Master was returning to Mount Washington to take full charge of the headquarters himself. We'll chant a little bit more and have a little bit more meditation. Mother, I give you my soul, soul, soul call. You can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore. Give my mother a soul, call. She can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore. Come out of the silent sky, come out of the mountain glen, come out of the silent sky, come out of the mountain glen, come out of my secret soul, Mother, come out of my secret soul, come out of my cave of silence, come out of my cave of silence. Mother, I give you my soul, soul, soul call. You can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore. Give my mother a soul, soul, soul call. She can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore. Come out of the silent sky, come out of the mountain glen, come out of the silent sky, come out of the mountain glen, come out of my secret soul, Mother, come out of my secret soul, come out of my cave of silence, come out of my cave of silence, come out of the silent sky, come out of the mountain glen, come out of the silent sky, come out of the mountain glen, come out of my secret soul, Mother, come out of my secret soul, come out of my cave of silence, come out of my cave of silence. Mother, I give you my soul, soul, soul call. You can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore. Give my mother a soul, soul, soul call. You can't remain hidden anymore. She can't remain hidden anymore. Come out of the silent sky, come out of the mountain glen, come out of the silent sky, come out of the mountain glen, come out of my secret soul, Mother, come out of my secret soul, come out of my cave of silence, out of my cave of silence, come out of the silent sky, come out of the mountain glen, come out of the silent sky, come out of the mountain glen, come out of my secret soul, Mother, come out of my secret soul, come out of my cave of silence, come out of my cave of silence. Mother, I give you my soul, 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 soul call. You can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore. My mother is soul call. She can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore. Come out of my cave of silence. Come out of my cave of silence. Come out of my cave of silence. You can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore. Give you my soul. after Durga's mother passed away, her mother, apparently her mother passed away in the house, and Durga was trying to change the energy. So she started burning some incense, and apparently her father thought it was dope. That's what they called it. And he said he was very upset, and so he threw it out. And she said, the poor man, he thought because I studied the Yogoda lessons that I was into dope. And apparently her whole family was very much against her at that point. And her mother actually had left her everything with the hope that she would care for her father. And 3 days after her mother passed, all of her siblings came over to the house, and they had arranged for the lawyer to come to read the will. Durga and Mr. Darling and Ernest and Florence had decided that they were going to go to the meditation that night, so they were on their way out the door when the family came. And they were quite distressed with the fact that Durga was leaving, but they hadn't given them any advance notice or warning. And Durga said they searched the house while she was gone for the will. And Durga said she didn't know much about the law, but at that time she knew enough to hide the will. And she also hid any of the influence that Yogoda, the lessons, any trace of the lessons. She hid those as well. And when she came back, her father, it seemed, he was quite angry, and she felt that he had been poisoned by her siblings. And he told Ernest that he had to leave and told him to get out, and he also told Durga to go with him. And so they began packing that night, and his father said, well, you don't need to, doesn't have to be that big of a rush. He said, you can leave tomorrow. And Durga said that they actually left, and they found a house within 3 days, and they moved out, and they moved and rented a house. And as I'd mentioned, Durga was left everything. She was left 2 houses. And the father later wanted to sell one of the houses. And the family was very concerned that Durga would not cooperate. So they treated her really badly. And she just basically said, you have nothing to worry about. And she sent him the deed to the house. She signed it over to him immediately. And later, the sister-in-law that had caused so much of the disruption in the family towards Durga and Ernest, she actually later said to Durga that Durga was the only one that ever sent her father any money. And Durga had had many mystical experiences with her mother. She had a connection with her mother after her mother passed a few times. And one was where she saw her mother in the womb, and she talked with Master about it, and Master acknowledged the fact that she had actually, witnessed her mother's rebirth. And then when her father died, she was with him. She wasn't with him. She had gone to see him, and he was apparently very happy to see her. He had been practicing a prayer, or the priest had been trying to get him to say a prayer, and the father didn't repeat it. They said he didn't repeat it until Durga got there, but Durga said it to him in French, and he understood it in French, and then he began to repeat it over and over and over again, and he even throughout the night. And when he saw Durga, the two of them together, there was apparently a light that emitted from Durga's head. and it commingled with a light that her father had. And the father actually saw this. And there were other witnesses in the room. There was another nun and some other people in the room that actually witnessed this as well. And Durga said that it was Master who was using her as an instrument to help her father cross over to the other side. And she said her father looked at her and just had the absolute most peaceful, sweetest smile she had ever seen on him when he saw this light. I already read to you about Masters helping her to heal, but Mr. Darling in 1929 gave Durga a present to go to LA. Well, I want to be able to read that to you. I'm not sure I can. I don't seem to have it marked. I lost my marking on it, unless this is it. That's not it. Well, well, anyway. Bear with me a minute here. I really would like to read this to you. Oh, here it is. So he gave her a birthday gift, and he gave her the fare to Los Angeles. And it was quite an ordeal for her to go this first time, but she took a Greyhound bus. We've heard that story before. She took a Greyhound bus. It took her 5 days to get there. And she ended up going to the YWCA and staying there. She said it changed her life. She rented this room at the Y. The person that she was supposed to room with actually never showed up, so she had the place all to herself. And then she talks about how when the devotee makes their move towards God, how he removes all obstacles. And it's interesting the way she talks about it, because she had obviously had a lot of loss in her life, and some very challenging ones when it comes to her family and her mother and so forth. And this is how she describes it, and which I thought was really beautiful. When the devotee begins his onward march towards God, he will remove all obstacles on the devotee's path. I can show you step by step how the Lord cleared my way. First, he removed my greatest attachment, my mother, by relieving her of her suffering. She had attached me to my father, and by giving me 2 houses with the understanding that I would take care of my father for the rest of his life, God used my own father to relieve me of that bond. If my father had not thrown me out of the house because of Yagoda, because of my promise to my mother, I would have stayed to take care of him. He lived to be 93 years old, and I would have been denied all those years with Master and God's work. Man proposes, but God disposes. And then the Lord made my body ill to bring me to Mount Washington for a warmer climate. Hence, stepping out of 7 years of married life into a life dedicated to God's and Master's service only. Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned that, but Durga had gotten very ill, and that's why Mr. Darling gave her that present, that she wanted to go to Florida, but she ended up going to Mount Washington. Mr. Darling willingly gave me up. I signed a trust deed giving Mr. Darling the lake property that we had jointly, leaving me free from personal attachment, as well as earthly possessions, that I might be free to give my full attention to the pursuit of my goal, God. My adopted son, she and Mr. Darling had actually adopted a young boy who was her nephew. She had the niece. She was raising the niece and the nephew of one of her siblings, who remarried, and they wanted the girl, but they didn't want the boy. He was actually not very nice to the boy, and so Durga ended up adopting him. So she said my nephew was removed, and my brother and family removed themselves by his and her own evil actions. So how the Lord takes care of his own, if we but open our hearts and minds and souls for the delivery. When I entered Mount Washington for the first time, an elderly lady, Mrs. Schramm, greeted me at the door. She was very kind and led me to the chapel. Narod was talking. And remember, Narod was the Brahmacharya Narod. He was the man that was in charge of the first church that she went to. And after 15 to 20 minutes, Master had walked in. Because eventually what happened is Narod, Brahmacharya Narod had told her to come there. She called him when she landed in L.A. And Master walked in. I had taken a seat in the front row. And as I looked at him and listened to his words of wisdom, again, that statue-like feeling of complete stillness came over me, and I did not move the rest of the evening. And Master, a few days later, I walked up the hill to Mount Washington. I did not see anyone in the lobby, so I walked to the kitchen. I saw Master and Rashid, his secretary, standing by the stove. As I stepped into the doorway, Master greeted me, saying, "Well, well, where have you been?" I answered, "At the YWCA." I advanced to take Master's hand. I could feel the same electric wave coming into my arm and through my body and out of my toes. Master told me later, at that instant, he recognized my face as one of the many that he had seen in a vision before landing on the American shores for the first time in 1920. Master asked me to stay for dinner that night, and later the others gathered to help Master cook. I helped in the kitchen, washing pans and pots, and I became suddenly very ill. I tried to shake it off, but it persisted, and I left the kitchen. I met Narod in the hallway, and I told him that I was leaving. He asked why. I told him I was not feeling well, and I did not want to stay if I could not be useful, and he suggested that I go to one of the girls' rooms to rest a while until dinner. I was really afraid, the way I felt that I would become quite ill, and I did not want to be a burden to anyone, especially here. I answered that I had better go to my room, and I would come some other day. Master told me later, "I was very disappointed when I heard that you had left. I thought, what is this? Lord, is she going to turn away so soon after returning home? But after I learned from Narod that you had left because you were feeling ill, I felt better. For I was giving this dinner in honor of your homecoming after incarnations of absence." Of course, had I known that he was doing this for me, I would have remained, even if it would have cost my life. That is one time ignorance was not bliss. So Ma gave 65 years of her life in service to her guru. When Master left the body, her life did not end there. As a matter of fact, it took a different turn. She went on for 35 years serving Guru. She became a counselor, a friend, a psychologist, a confidant for many of Master's disciples. Her phone was busy day and night, and she never turned down a sincere appeal for help, regardless of color or race or person's religion or their gender. And her forgiveness and love were always present. She always said, it doesn't matter how many times you fall off the path. It's how many times you get back on. As long as you pick yourself up and go forward again. Ma's ashes are interned in a crypt in Forest Lawn, along with other nuns who have served the SRF Fellowship and Master, and who have passed in service to them. This crypt is in Glendale, California, in case you don't know. After Durga moved to Mount Washington, the first time Master saw her there, he called her Ma Durga. So let's just have a few more moments of silence, and then we'll end. Let's just meditate for a few moments. I want to leave you with something that I always find wonderful, is to be able to really get a saint's perspective or attitude on something. And this is just a little thing about how Durga talked about when Master corrected her. She said, I remember once when Master was scolding me. I don't recall the incident, for there were so many, because I fully deserved them. But to this one in particular, I answered, after all, sir, I am a grown woman. And his face became crestfallen. And he answered, oh, I wish you hadn't said that, because I never see you all as grown women, but as children of God. Believe me, I never said that again. I wasn't without my share of scolding, for I had a lot of knots to untie. And as Master used to say, his own guru broke every psychological bone in his body, and thank goodness that our Master was kind and thoughtful enough to break all the psychological bones of my mind. I received many, many deserving corrections, and if it hadn't been for those and his constant vigilance, I wouldn't be here today, because without those impartial, impersonal, and righteous corrections, one cannot progress on the spiritual, mental, or physical path. I deserved much more than I actually received, for he was so merciful and ever so forgiving, ever without asking for forgiveness. And if we showed remorse and acted to prove our sincere effort to do better. Even without asking for forgiveness. Let me read that again. I deserved much more than I actually received, for he was so merciful and ever so giving, even without asking for forgiveness. If we showed remorse and acted to prove our sincere effort to do better. I will be doing an additional part to this evening, which is Durga spent much time with Rajasi, helping him, and especially when he became ill, she was asked by Master to help him and to serve him. And so that will be the second part. Watch for it. It'll be coming up in a few weeks. So thank you all. God bless you. Have a pleasant night.